Stay more comfortable, more concealed, and in the stand longer with Osseo gear. Premium camouflage apparel created for bow hunters by bow hunters. Osseo's revolutionary patented camo patterns and innovative features are designed to keep whitetail bow hunters totally invisible and dead quiet. Elevate your game with Osseo. Visit asiogear.com and take 20% off your purchase with code TRUTH20. Hey folks, I want to take a minute to give you a heads up about Tethered's latest gear. If you're serious about staying mobile in the woods, you've got to check this stuff out. Now, I've been using their Ultra Lock saddle, and now the SD saddle is available. And let me tell you, this thing is dialed. It's ultra light, super adjustable, and most importantly, it's comfortable. You're not going to be shifting around up in the tree wondering if your legs are going to fall asleep. Pair that with the Predator V platform, which is stable, lightweight, and has an angled front edge for comfort. This thing will give you plenty of room for those critical moments when you need to make a move on a deer. And if you're like me and you spend long hours in the tree, you'll appreciate the new Predator CFX platform. Carbon fiber construction that keeps it light, but tough enough to handle whatever you throw at it. This is the kind of gear that makes a difference when you're out there all day. And listen, if you're always juggling your gear like I am, Tethered's got you covered with the Universal Platform Pack. More rigid to make getting your platform in and out easier, and 2 sizes to fit the smaller and larger platforms. Whether you're hunting public land or heading to your favorite spot on the back 40, this setup makes carrying your platform so much easier. So if you're serious about getting in the game this season and hunting smarter, check out Tethered at tethered.com. Their gear will keep you lighter, quieter, and up in a tree longer, which, as we all know, is where the magic happens. All right, everyone. Happy Wednesday to you. Hope you're doing well. Hope you are feeling fine today. Got a cool shirt for you guys today. I want to give you a quick heads up. I got my buddy on, Mr. Stephen Latrhop from Latrhop & Son Boots. They're being super cool and giving us a discount code TRUTH10 to use on their non-typical insoles. And what those are essentially insoles you can put in your boot to replace the current ones whenever the temperatures drop, when it gets to late season, or whenever you start to get cold feet. And these will actually give you a couple degrees boost in your boots, which we all know time in tree or time on set, especially in late season, goes a long way to filling tags. So head over to lathropsons.com and check out those non-typical insoles. Use the promo code TRUTH10 and pick those up. Without further ado, let's just go ahead and jump into today's show. All right, folks, welcome back to another episode of the Truth from the Stand Deer Hunting Podcast. And today I got on my buddy, Mr. Steven. Oh, man, you can see how bad this cold is already. That's the worst part. Like, you can't breathe through your nose. So there's certain syllables that just won't come out.
Can you?
Yeah, no, I can't. I got my buddy on, Mr. Stephen Latrhop. What's going on, buddy?
I'm doing good. It's chilly here this morning, Clint.
Good, man. I'm glad to hear it. It looks like maybe you made it out of the woods over the holidays with no sickness. I managed to not be able to shuck and jive it as keenly as you could.
Yeah, it was drifting around our house too. So far, knock on wood, I dodged it.
Yeah,
hopefully it's not going to get me this weekend.
I know. Keep the boogeyman away, because we were supposed to record this right before Christmas, and you had a house full of sickness, and so we rescheduled to after the first of the year. And then we were messaging yesterday about trying to get everything back up and running. And it's like, of course, I caught the Black Plague now. If folks can hear it, probably see it in my puffy eyes and puffy face. But we're going to power through, man.
That's right.
You've had some cold temps. We were talking yesterday. We were going to try to record, I think later today. But you have some good weather coming in, and you're trying to get on some deer.
Yeah, if I can get my things taken care of here. Yes, it's one of my favorite times of the year, without a doubt. It really is. I prep for this kind of stuff all season, and I know a lot of guys like the rut, and it's fun. I do too, but I really think that late season stuff's pretty cool. So I'm hopeful this. I think they're calling it Blair. This storm is Blair. I don't know how much snow we're going to get, but it's going to be a significant amount.
Oh, wow. I didn't realize you guys were getting snow.
Used to that, and we're not used to that.
That's interesting, because I don't know. I think we're supposed to get a little bit of, I think some flurries, if I'm not mistaken. I think is all they're calling for in my area. I didn't realize you guys were going to get a pile of snow. If that's the case.
They're talking, some areas can get over 12 inches.
Oh, wow.
Like, I'm serious. If you look at below Interstate 70, right below Interstate 70, there's just a band across the entire state from St. Louis. And I mean, it's just gnarly.
Right. Yeah.
It's
I guess for context, people who are listening are probably like, what are they talking about with all this snow? So I guess before we jump into things, we should probably give a little bit of background for you and so people have a sense of who you are and what you do. But if you wouldn't mind, just kind of as an icebreaker, let folks know, where you're from and what you do for a living.
sure. So Lathrup and Sons is located in southeastern Illinois. To put you on a map, we're about, we'll just say 2 hours southwest of Indianapolis. Evansville, Indiana, because we're just right off of the Indiana line. Evansville, Indiana is about hour and 20 minutes to my house. So that kind of puts you, we're on the eastern side. Born and raised here, communities, Robinson, Illinois, about 8,000 people. Our father was a podiatrist. For anyone listening, that's a foot doctor.
Right.
But my father was very skilled, very talented, did a lot of training, did a lot of teaching, did a lot of orthopedic surgery. So he did a lot of ankle surgery, forefoot heel surgery. And yours truly and my brother James worked in his clinics. Now, when I say clinics, these weren't little suite offices. They were full-fledged office buildings. He had it all. You walked in as a patient, even with a semi-traumatic injury, and he could treat you and do everything he needed to right there. So it was truly a one-stop shop. And then when James and I both reached the age of about 19, we really found our path. Of course, our dad wanted us to go to medical school, but we had this draw to the orthopedic appliances. So the fabrication of the orthotics, the building of the shoes, the understanding of the biomechanics. So the biomechanics is really the function of a foot in motion, understanding, the stance that somebody has and peak pressures and the shape of the foot. And we did a lot of diabetic wound care. And anyone that's listening, diabetics are prone to a lot of sores on their feet because the diabetes affects their nerves. It's just like having a shot in your lip. You'll bite your lip. It's numb. Well, their feet are numb. So that's what's going on. But that's really how Lathrup and Sons got started in the whole orthotic and the footwear. So when we talk about really doing professional boots and building boots,
wow,
that's going, man.
Yeah, that's wild, man. I didn't know that was the background, because that was one of the things I wanted to ask was just how do you get into the boot space? But we're going to get into that in a second. But because the marriage of the orthotic and boots, coming from like podiatry, I guess if you will, into like the hunting space is an interesting kind of path. And so how did you get into hunting? Because like for me in Pennsylvania, I always kind of say on the show, it's like, I was born into it. It was a birthright. Pennsylvania, big hunting heritage state. When I turned 12 years old, I had a gun in my hand, BB guns in my hand, and killing blackbirds in trees since I can remember, and so it's just never a question as to whether or not I was going to do it. So I'm just curious, like, what was your hunting kind of journey like? And
Yeah,
what did you...
so it's kind of funny. Our dad wasn't much of a hunter. He was really passionate about boating and business and helping people. His medical background. And I don't know, I guess it was probably from my mother's side of the family because my grandfather had an interest in fishing in the outdoors, and I think he did more upland hunting because there weren't really that many deer up in that area. He was more, my mother's family is from more central Illinois. I suppose that's where James and I got it. And then my father, we had some family friends, and the one guy in particular, Larry, he had just a beautiful trophy ring, right? Just had really good mule deer that he shot and some elk and these deer. And I just always remember probably, I don't know, 12, 13 years old, like walking around there with his son, just looking at him going, wow, man, like that's really cool. Like I want to do that. That's what I want to do, and I would probably hint to mom, that I really liked it. And that's how the interest started for me. And then it started with a old bear whitetail 2 compound, and God, I don't know. I think I hunted for 3 years before I got one, but then James came in, so I started bow hunting at 15.
Hmm.
And my brother, because I'm 15 and I'm running around with a group of guys, and you know what it's like in a small community. If I'm a bow hunter, there's maybe only 4 guys in the whole high school that hunt right with a bow. They all gun hunt because that's big in Illinois. The firearm season or shotgun season back then was slug season. It was like you knew these guys, right? There might be a freshman, a sophomore. Hey, I shot a deer over the weekend with my bow. Really? What'd you get? It's like because you didn't know all these guys,
Right?
And then I suppose as we got our license, and then we all pooled money to go to the archery shops and stuff. James just got vacuumed into it, so he was a sidekick then, the younger brother, but
Right.
he was getting to go start bow hunting at like 14. So I mean, that's really what we did, and our dad was like cheering us on. He thought it was great, because we started finding some success, but our success was, it was tough. There wasn't anything easy about it because we didn't really have anybody that, just took us under wings and said, go sit in a stand.
Right. Yeah.
That wasn't the way it was, man. He and I grounded out, like sitting out there in the garage. Dad gave us the tools. We'd go to the lumberyard and buy 2x4s and a 3 feet of chain and we were trying to build stands. Like we didn't have any of that stuff,
Yeah. That's wild, man. It's always funny, the difference. I mean, I love all the tools that people have at their disposal now, especially new hunters, to help them kind of get in and grease the skids for them a little bit, right? And not just from like a technology and tool perspective, like hardware tools, more like the knowledge kind of component of tools. They've got podcasts, they've got videos, they've got all kinds of resources to kind of help them expedite their learning curve to where they don't spend the years like toiling away in futility of not seeing deer, right? But whenever we were growing up,
it's like seriously depressing.
It is.
Imagine you're not seeing anything. You're not seeing anything. You have no means to communicate with anybody, dude. It's a dial rotary phone.
Yeah.
Right? To talk to anybody, right? Nowadays, you come out of the stand, you're hunting that big deer that you come out of the stand and you're like licking your wounds, like texting everybody, another night now, nothing happened, God, I don't know what's going to happen next. Back then, you didn't have anyone to pick the phone up and call. You just kind of, just keep going.
Well, it's just even looking for advice, you know what I mean? Where it's like your buddies weren't any better than you were, and it's like, and to your point, I come out and I'm trying to figure out what I'm going to do or what might be going on. It's like, not only do I have my group of buddies that I'm close with, that are all like some really phenomenal hunters, but I also have buddies that are like, guys I know from like the show. It's like, so I've certainly in the past have texted guys like Dan Enfalt and been like, dude, I'm getting my pants beat off me in this swamp. Like, this is what I'm seeing. What do you think? And give me advice or whatever, or Joe Miles or whoever it is, right? Like these guys that are really, really good hunters that I look at and go, man, one day I'll be like that. You know what I mean? It's like when I was growing up, my dad never really archery hunted. My uncle and my dad were like the 2 best hunters I knew. And I thought the deer that he had were like, I was always as a kid, like, man, one day if I could kill deer like that, and now it's funny because like my dad kind of jokes about it because he's like, man, you've killed way, and I go back and I look at his house now, his cabin, he still has those mounts. And like, as a kid, they seemed like they were just giants, but now I'm like, man, I was like 115-inch deer. You know what I mean? It's like, it's funny, how like your perspective changes, but he was hunting also in PA and in a time when, if you saw a rack buck back then, that was news, we just didn't have a lot of them, when I was growing up. But
it's really neat. Like you just think about, and the statement's true. I think they say the cards are stacked against the deck stacked. I don't know the saying. Anyway, you really did have it that way back then because you didn't have good, really great clothing, right?
Yeah.
Most kids around here were wearing bibs. bibs for Carhartt bibs or something similar. Your rubber boots, there wasn't a lot of advanced technology in that.
Mm-hmm.
And everyone in the Midwest here was wearing like the green and yellow rubber boots, the Grange. I mean, it just an
Mm-hmm.
old farmhand boot is all it was, and that was what you wore.
Mm-hmm.
Pants tucked in, it was kind of the staple. And I mean, I've said it before. My first rubber boots, my grandfather gave to me, and they were a
Mm-hmm.
laced up pair of gusseted rubber boots. To this day, I'll tell you what, that whole design about the way it laced up around the foot was way more supportive,
Mm-hmm.
just as waterproof. Like it was a gusseted rubber boot that opened up. The gusset's the flap of rubber. It actually had a pleat in it.
Yeah.
It was old school as hell. And like they would never build anything like that now.
Mm-hmm.
It'd take them too long to build it. This was
Right.
all vulcanized together, but the rubber actually pleated just like a leather boot, and it had eyelets that went up it that were
Yeah.
reinforced, and it was all leather. It was pretty far out, man.
Right. I remember my first pair of like quote unquote warm boots, right, that I had, because I don't even know what I wore as a kid. I probably literally just wore my dad's old work boots. It's probably
You
what I
did, and
wore
you
to
probably
start.
just froze your toes
Oh,
off.
I froze my ass off.
That's
Yeah.
what I'm saying.
Yeah.
We
I mean,
just
the clothing that I was wearing and stuff like that was literally just like my dad's, like, and I'm thinking back, it's like I used to put on like so many pairs of sweatpants underneath of like a thin pair of like real tree, like camo pants or whatever that he had.
Hell
But I
yeah.
remember the one pair of boots I got that were warmer. I mean, we did the old trick of like, if it was going to be wet out, man, I put my feet in, bread bags and then put them
I
inside the boot.
that one,
You
but
know,
I heard people talking.
yeah, yeah, we did. I definitely did that. And then my grandfather gave me a pair of he called them Mickey Mouse boots.
Yeah, I've heard of them.
Yeah, they were there, and he may have been some truth to it. But I like they looked so old when I got them that I was like, he must have wore these in the war. You know what I mean? Like that's kind of what my thinking
It could have
was.
been an issue. I'm sure they were an issue. There's a lot of these. That was kind of a thing back there. I know there was a traditional guy that made them real popular, and I don't think back then that wasn't the intent. But he and Gene and Barry Wenzel, these guys all kind of hunted this Montana region. When they lived
Mhm.
out there. It was Paul Bruner, and he owned Screaming Eagle tree stands. I don't know if you Screaming Eagle tree stands. They're freaking awesome stand. They're heavy, really, really freaking heavy. But dude, they're rock solid. Like if you're
Mhm.
gonna hunt late season on food, they don't make a sound.
Really?
No, man, you go tunk, and they don't move.
And they don't move.
They don't move. But he owned it. It was Screaming Eagle tree stand. It was Paul Bruner. Yeah, I've got several of them.
Nice. That's awesome. So yeah, I mean, it's always interesting to see how guys have come up in hunting, and it's just doing this show. I get that juxtaposition of guys my age and some guys, even older, and then like some guys who are younger who've like had a lot of technology or a lot of like the advancements that they've been able to use. So it's always kind of interesting to see, people's kind of journey. What was like when because like you said, you didn't really have anybody to go to for advice. Like you and your brother were just kind of learning this stuff on your own, along with your small group of friends.
There was a group of us.
Like, what was your watershed moment? Like when you started finally like not figuring it out. Cause I always say like deer hunting, like I don't think you ever truly figured it out, but
ask me that. Hang on a second. I'd like to say it was the first buck that I killed, but that's not true because that was that wasn't it.
Yeah, what was the first one where it's like you when you killed it, you were like, man, I figured this deer out, or it might not have even been that you were hunting that specific deer, but you're like, I've figured out these deer to where I could kill this one.
Well, specifically was this deer. That was specific. Like that was. You just had to, right?
Right.
But just figuring deer in general, when it started clicking, I don't know. I suppose when I started getting a system down to really understand, early season kind of hunt the fringe, watch, don't move in on them.
Hmm.
Is more of a two-stand approach, right?
Hmm.
And I guess I kind of do that now, to be honest with you. I'll sit back on areas that I got a chance.
Hmm.
But I'm in the chance mode, but I'm really just seeing what I can lay my eyes on.
Hmm.
And then when I see something happen a couple times and the weather's right, then I hop in. Yeah, I would say I was probably 18, 19 before I really started to start putting it together to understand more about, late season, not hunting in the morning. And I know guys will shoot me down on that, but that's just, you do your thing, I'll do mine. That's
Right.
not.
Yeah. I mean, there's all kinds of different ways to skin the cat. It's always where I always say where with whatever and wherever you're confident is what you should do. Like everything else be damned, but
I would say though, I've never had anyone ask me that, and it's not a specific deer. I mean, you can say, well, you killed your first buck, but that just blind luck, right? Like my
right.
first one was really nice. I mean, it just
Hmm.
dumb luck. I was so pleased that I was able to get it done. I'll never forget it. And, but it had to be, that. And
Yeah.
you kind of take the stuff for granted when you start figuring it out.
Hmm.
You just, and then I'll even catch Lane, my son, asking me questions, like he's trying to get in my head, and I just like trying to figure out what I'm thinking, but I make the decision so quick and I do it that I just
Yeah.
don't explain myself well. I think so, and I think that this gentleman that I was talking about that had his trophy room that really influenced me as a young kid, I think a lot of him too. Really respect him. Uh, I don't think there's anyone in this county that's as hardcore as what he was, man.
Hmm.
No, I'm talking hardcore.
That's cool.
Yeah, big time. He's a freaking hunter.
Yeah.
And I don't think, I said to him one time, he made mention that there was a neighbor that called and he was helping him out. I looked at him and I just stared right at him. And I said, "You never helped me out. What gives? What are you doing helping this guy hang a stand? Like this guy, and he just looked at me and just started cackling, just laughing. You know what? I think that was his kind of you'll figure it out, boy.
Right. Yeah. The thing
Yeah,
is I think
you'll
sometimes,
figure it out. You gotta earn this. And I'm no pro. I'm no expert. I think I can figure it out and I can get creative around here and I can finally start putting the puzzle together. And um, I'd like to say I'm just shooting monster deer, but I love to shove arrows and deer too much to just stay away from 'em. I simply won't do it. I mean,
yeah.
I just love to bow hunt, man.
Yeah.
People see some of the deer I shoot now and, oh, he's a big buck hunter. I just like to bow hunt, man. I
Right.
love it.
Yeah. And you're in a great spot too. Like as far as like, at least I've never hunted Illinois, but I have some, including you, a few people that I know who live in that kind of Illinois, Indiana.
Mhm.
I don't call it a triangle, but like
Yeah,
that area,
yeah,
and some of the biggest deer I see get killed come out of little that little area, that like basically they're on the line essentially, between Indiana and Illinois. And I'd love to make it out there at some point just because I've seen some hammers get killed out there. And so there's some great hunting to be had. So there's definitely opportunity to kill good deer, you know what I mean? And so, but
So and I wish it wasn't this easy. They're a little more generous than they used to be about it, and there was, they encourage shooting a lot of does, and we've been real careful with that.
Mhm.
You know,
Yeah.
just try not to do it. I know a lot of guys do it. I've not had a biologist, really look at what I've got and tell me what I should or shouldn't. I just and it's not just my stuff. It's ground that we have together, my brother and I, but we just look at what we've got during the hunting season. We get down to the wire, and it's like, do you think we ought to shoot a lot of does in here? I mean, I didn't see a lot this year. There's the one group over here that's got like the same two mamas and their two fawns,
Mm-hmm.
and they're there every day.
Right.
Or not every day, but you know what I mean.
Yeah.
When you're seeing them over and over again. And I said, and then we got that other group on the other end of this 40-acre piece, and they're always messing around. I don't know if we should go ahead and whack them up, bang them around too bad. So,
yeah. Well, I mean, it's like, to your point, it's like you got to be, like a steward of your land, right? Like, because, the agencies are managing things at a statewide level.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's like, and they do the best they can. Some leave some to be desired in terms of how they manage and stuff like that, depending on what state you're at. And I don't think I'm not telling any non-truths there.
Well,
I think you have to be a steward of your individual land, because you spend the most amount of time on whatever you hunt, whether you're hunting a piece of private that you hunt, or whether you're hunting a piece of public that you hunt.
That's right.
The people who are on it every day, what's there.
You got a good vibe. You've got your finger on that pulse. Like when you're seeing, and I'm going to tell you, I totally get the farmers getting irritated with all these deer, because I used to be like, nah, man. I mean, it's a big deal now.
Mm-hmm.
These guys are putting massive amounts of money into that crop every year, and to have a third of their beans along the edge of the woods get wiped out and stuff because of over browsing, it stunts the stuff, man. And I get it. And in certain areas, these deer are just getting whacked constantly along the road. There probably are a few too many,
Yeah. So how's your season been so far this year? I know you're still grinding it out, and you and I talked, earlier in December.
Yeah.
You have one in mind, maybe, and so just curious.
I do. And then so like happens to most guys, and I'm not any different. You go into the season, you got a few deer that you hope you're going to get a chance at. I think every hunter's dream, going from 2023 into 2024, you're going to pull some of those same bucks in and go, I don't know how many times I've said it. I'm sure you said it. God, next year it's going to be off. And then it's that disappear vamoose. and then the one, and I had one deer in particular, actually two, we'll call them redemption deer. And I had a really, really rough season in 2023. Like, I could get on big deer. I couldn't kill big deer.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I mean, really messing it up, man. And I can blame part of it on trying to execute a shot differently than I have for this all my life. Okay. Mm-hmm. And so I got one of those bucks down, and it was one that I actually scarred the top of his back, and I had no idea that it was him. I hadn't even seen him. And I shot him like 3 days before the Illinois gun season, and I killed him at 3:30 in the afternoon. He came from this is another example. He used the wind coming into that thing. Like, I mean, you would not have even believed it to look this direction. It was a bluff. He came out of a bedding area. To the northwest. And where I was at was 20 yards, 30, depending on, because it scooped at an angle there. It depended on where you were looking. And it was a bluff. Mm-hmm. I mean, you could go down it, but it wasn't easy. You were digging your heels in. That was the last place that I expected a deer to come from, because everything was coming up out of this bottom. It was all grown up on this spine, and they were either cutting by me or out there. They're scent checking, right? Mm-hmm. But there was a food plot off to my left. It was just a small little clover plot. And they're not scent checking that. They're sitting checking all that bedding area. They're just glancing out the corner of their eye at the clover. They're not even exposing themselves to the field, right?
Mm-hmm.
They're just keep going through. Dude, I am sitting there in that stand, and I look and I see a deer. Like, I'm in a double trunk tree. I see a deer move. I glance to my left. I'm like, instantly, oh shit! Grab my bow, draw, thump, shoot him. It's over with. But that wind was blowing out of the southwest, hitting me in the face. I don't know what you do. I tell my son, as talk to James about this, how I go and pick of the 14 to 16 stands that I have ready to set is what's going on at that time of the year. And then the way I approach it is I look at the geographical lay of the land and say to myself, okay, and maybe you guys talk about this, but I don't listen to enough of this to know. But I look at this and I go, if I was even a 3.5-year-old, I think you got to give them a little bit of credit. They've made it to that age group. I think they're still going to use the wind to some. They've learned that, right? So if I bed right here, I can kind of see over this valley floor. Plus, I can smell, right? If a doe's working in this bedding area,
Right.
so I look at that stuff and determine whether or not I think I ought to go sit in these places. Like, I kind of know the land, like they like to bed here. So if I was a big deer, it just ups the odds. And then I lay that out. Like, if I got 4 stands that are good for a certain wind, I'll go, this stand, I think that they would like that and that. This one, it's a one-shot deal. So that's how I kind of pick my spot. Okay. I had no idea. I learned a lot, man. I just looked, and here he came, and he had come crosswind, cutting the wind right in his face. He had dropped down into this creek bottom, and he came up that bluff. And I mean, it was like that. He was there, and I'm like, whoa. Just like in a million years, you would have never thought, if you told me, Clint, he's going to cut the wind. He's going to do that to do it. Yeah, he is going to do that because he was a 6.5-year-old buck.
Right.
He did it. That's how he keeps his skin alive. But yeah, so I was able to get that down, and then she just warmed up, and it just kind of slowed way, way down. So I backed off.
Yeah, man. Those old deer, they just, I've heard, buddies of mine who have consistently hunted, old deer, always tell me, man, those deer are almost a different species. A different species of whitetail. They just act different. They don't act the way the other deer act. And I think academically I knew it, I just don't get a lot of experience with old deer in Pennsylvania historically. And then, the past couple of years I've been fortunate to hunt some, older age class deer, and now I get it, right? You just watch how they act and how they do things a little bit differently. They don't act like the rest of the deer. They don't use the same kind of travel routes that the other deer use. They might use the same general route, but it's always just a little bit different.
They want to get through it to where they know. They just want to get through it without any interaction, and they are really covering their ass. This dude was covering his ass. There was no trail there. No trail there. He had not got bumped. He was doing the big buck walk at 3:30 in the afternoon, and it was almost 70 degrees.
Yeah. I mean,
and you and I could have sat there, and I could have told you, this is where this is where we're going to be. This is the wind we're going to hunt it on. These are the reasons. And I would say that you would have sat right there with me and gone, dude, this is a good spot. Like, this setup's really good. Like, this is good. But I don't think that you would have, if I would have said to you, this deer is going to be bedding in that thicket over there, 250 yards on a west wind. He's going to quarter that wind, drop into a creek bottom, and come up a bluff and safety pin this ridge and pass by me at 20 yards. You would have smiled at me and said, you better have a good ass, because you're going to have to sit there a lot to get something to do it.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like, that's it. And that's the only way you get confidence in thinking out of the box like that is to have it happen to you.
Yeah. That's it, dude. I mean, that's
Like when you have that happen to you, it just completely opens the aura of what is possible, right?
yeah.
At least for me, it does.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing. It's like you think. I think the safe way, not the safe way. I think the way our brains make sense of things is to kind of think of them in ways that we would do things that seem to follow some form of logic, right? Like a deer's going to come out of here because this is the path of least resistance. Because we hear that all the time.
Exactly.
Deer want to use the path of least resistance.
The ridges, the
Right.
valleys.
And a lot of times those things can work, in certain circumstances, right? But I think the longer you do this and the more you get an opportunity to spend time around mature deer, what you learn is that, yeah, most of the deer are going to do that. But oftentimes that deer that's the cock of the walk, or the oldest age class deer.
The one you
Right.
that starting permanently on his shoulders on November 7th or 6th
Right.
a year ago.
Yeah, he's not doing that. He's
200 yards from where you kill him.
Yeah. He's going to do something a little different, right? And then when you start to see them, do those things that seem out of character, it then starts to make you think about, like you said, like your setups. Where do you set up? Because I think we often like to tell ourselves that deer like the path of least resistance, and I do think it's true for a lot of deer, right? Like they like to follow edges. Like there's some very basic things that do hold true. But if you're trying to hunt that one deer or the 1% deer or the 5% deer, on your property, wherever you might be hunting, it's setting up in those spots that seem very unlikely that a deer is going to be there. Is oftentimes where that deer ends up being, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. And you have to stop the don't believe it, and you have to stop it's the uncertainty of, I don't want to go waste my time. It's not going to work. Well, those are the guys that kill. Those are the guys that they do it.
Yeah.
I'm one of those guys that you just got to go.
Yeah. You just got to set up in the
really
funky spot.
You gotta think out of the box, and in all these, everybody that's finding success, even private, public land, success breeds success.
Mm-hmm.
It does. Failure can too, because if you're really stubborn, you're going to get good at it. You're going to be a grinder. If you're not, you're going to fold.
Well, the failure could be, you know what I mean? Like I always say, failure is, you don't want to fail for failure's sake. You want to fail in attempting to solve something, and like learning that that's not the solution is just as good as finding the solution. But you have to have the right context, right? Because let's say that setup you had, and let's say that it worked out differently. Maybe you were set up 60 yards off of that setup, right? And you saw that deer do what he did, but you didn't get to kill him. It's like, well, that was a failed hunt. But what you learned was, man, those big deer don't act the way everyone else does. That bluff is an applicable travel route for them, right? He's going to not want to walk the same path as all the other deer. I need to maybe change my thinking about my setups. You know what I mean? So,
and just talking about this is why I think like this late season, we talk about my roots and James's roots and your roots and the background, and the guys that I really enjoy and I work with. And I would say it's, visiting with Dan and stuff, like we just get it. Like when this late season hits, dude, that just takes us back to our roots, man. It does. It's like, forget trying to pattern these 6.5-year-old deer. Let's hunt some freaking deer, dude, in the snow. Like, let's go, baby. Like, that's what it's all about. Like, you have no idea how fired up I am about this. Like, I have waited just to be able to sit out there and watch them moving through the woods. Watch them get up and flicker their tail and go, oh, hell, here they come. And I don't mean from a killing deal. I'm just like, oh, yeah, man. Like, okay, here comes one, here comes two, here comes three. We don't have, massive numbers of deer, but, I mean, you get 10, 15 head of deer out there just crunching down soybeans, and what you do is you learn hunting these big deer late season. But you ought to see what those big bastards do, man, coming into the fields. Oh, they're not dumb at all.
Yeah.
I have watched them come out into a CRP, stand in it, and the wind wasn't just right for them, and stand there. And there is no way that these deer were smelling me 100%, because I had deer out in front of me feeding, and they just stand there and they stand there and they stand there. And I mean, when I get one doing that, it freaks me out. Like, cause I'm like, this is going to go south real fast.
Right.
Like, what is he doing? And it's almost like a decoy standing there, like doesn't even move his head, maybe a little that way and a little that way, and just stands there because the wind's not right, man.
Mm-hmm.
And he's like thinking, this is going back to that. And then we're talking late season deer that have been pressured. And this deer's like, I'm watching him, and I'm on the field, and there's deer eating, and there's a wall of 4-foot tall CRP grass, and he's 100 yards from that edge, and it's 10 degrees outside. You know what he wants to do? He wants to eat. But he's standing in those weeds, and he's like looking, and all you can see is about that much of him, and he's just thinking methodically about this, going, Now, talking with a good friend Rendell, Eric, about this, he and I were talking one day, and he brought something up to me that, just it. We get talking about these things.
Yeah.
You know what I think that buck was doing that night?
What's that?
I think he was killing time, letting the thermals start to settle a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
Because that field had a very slight taper to it.
Mm-hmm.
And what he did next, he did not walk straight into the field. He walked around, out of his way, got in the tail of it, and started feeding it. It's just awesome to hunt him.
Yeah.
Watch him.
Yeah. That's... you learn so much by getting the opportunity to watch mature deer do mature deer things. You know, like they're the best teachers. And that's why I said, you know, buddies of mine asked me, you know, I mean, a lot of folks know that I was hunting that deer now because I did that podcast with Tony about it and stuff. But during the season, like there weren't a whole lot of guys they're just some very close friends that knew I was hunting that deer. And they after he died, you know, got killed or whatever happened to him, they would always ask, like, you know, are you bummed? I'm like, well, of course I am, right? Like you're bummed. I was like, but man, I was like, what an education. You know, I was like, I chased around a mountain monarch for 30 days. You know, I was like, there's no better teacher on how to hunt mature deer than to chase a mature deer around the woods for a month.
I'll ask you this. Once you got that deer shot, did you find that there were some guys on the outside that weren't really public people, that weren't real braggers about it, that were really good whitetail guys that reached out and said, hey, you know, here's what I knew about this deer? Like, did you have anybody? Because in our area, man, it's different than like mountain hunting like that, right? Because it's in West. You'd really be surprised what you start to find out. You know, when a guy gets a deer, it's like, God damn it, what was that deer doing?
Right.
Like, it isn't a jealousy that he killed.
No.
I mean, it's more of a, like, God, the world's a lot bigger than I thought it was.
Right.
Like, what I'm saying, like, this deer was doing way more than what I thought he was really doing.
Yeah. I mean, no, because I mean, I knew most of the people who knew of, I won't say most people, I knew a lot of the people who actually knew of that deer because me and two other buddies were hunting him. And we had pretty good tabs on the deer. And then I met a guy in the area that I was hunting, this old timer, I've mentioned him before, became really good friends with him. He actually knew exactly where the deer was found dead because his nephews actually found him in an area that they were hunting. And so I was able to kind of put the final piece of like, okay, exactly where did they find him? But I didn't have a whole lot of people reach out and say, hey, you know, I had pictures of him here or there. I kind of knew some of the people who already did. So that deer wasn't really doing anything necessarily out of the ordinary that I didn't think that he was already doing.
It's one,
Yeah, it's I mean, it's funny 'cause after that, like it almost seems like every big deer in Pennsylvania that got killed, I got a message saying, "Hey, was this the deer?" You know what I mean? Like, I get messages all the time. I got messages all fall about that, and it's like some of them were like killed on the opposite side of the state and stuff like that. But that, and I don't say much even when people do reach out, only because I don't want anybody to know where I was hunting. you know. So I stay pretty tight-lipped. Tight-lipped about it, but it was a great education to chase him nonetheless. But the funny thing is, when you mentioned snow, right? Because the last couple hunts I did after, I found out that deer was dead. I actually went back because there was a second deer I was interested in, and I only hunted, that right after Thanksgiving. I think it was like 2 days I hunted, and there was like a foot of snow that the mountain had gotten, and my feet were freaking freezing, And so the way you and I actually met was. I got done with that hunt and I was like, man, I need to do something different if I'm going to hunt some of these areas, especially in the snow and stuff like that, because my feet just weren't lasting, and you guys had the non-typical insole, right? And my buddy Josh had done a video on them kind of showing the difference between the two, between like a regular insole and his insole. And I just thought it was interesting. And I was like, man, I wonder how good this thing works. So I messaged you guys and said, hey, what's the deal with this non-typical insole? Would it work for me in this circumstance? And then you and I actually got on the phone and kind of started chatting. And that was kind of how our relationship started. And then we actually went down the whole path of like talking about, what type of boot am I wearing? What do I need to get out of a boot? And the thing we kind of really landed on, not beyond the non-typical insole and like setting me up for like late season and stuff like that, and making sure I'm, that I know what I need to do to make sure that my feet can tolerate the cold, better than they have in the past, is we started talking more specifically about choosing the right boot and the right fit of boot. And what we started talking about was how people, hunters specifically, it's like they buy all this different gear that they'll spend money on. And it always seems like boots are almost like the last thing they think about. And as I've gotten older, it becomes the first thing I think about, because I've gone through so many different kinds of boots that haven't worked for me that it ultimately becomes like one of the determining factors of how long I'm able to stay out or how comfortable I am on a hunt or whatever the case is. And so you taught me a lot about just like the importance of finding the right boot for the right type of application. So I guess, I guess let's start with like when you're choosing a boot, because you're the expert, what is like the critical kind of components of that whenever people are looking for that? Because you shared a lot of stuff with me that changed my perspective on like what I look for in a boot now. And I just want to help other people kind of understand like what is it they should be looking for? What do they need the boot to do? And break it down from like, soup to nuts essentially.
Yeah. So this is what I would say, first of all. Let's just, for an easy explanation, we have to say, so I'm a whitetail hunter.
Mm-hmm.
I need a performance whitetail boot. When I say that to you, that should resonate, a lace-up boot, not a rubber boot, right?
Right.
Okay. And the next thing that you have to ask yourself is, okay, that's what we're wanting. But the most important thing is not the size, it's the shape. Because if you've got a Fred Flintstone foot and you don't match it with a Fred Flintstone boot, it's not going to feel good. And then you're going to be like all the other guys online saying, they run different. You need to buy that size. And you're having to jockey a half size. Yeah, I get it. When you're having to jockey a full size and a half, you're either way off on your sizing. You've never been sized correctly. So size is definitely not it. So you want to always match that boot to the shape of the foot. Then when you have that, you start looking at the different components to make sure that what you've got on your foot now is spot on.
Right.
Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, it does. Because I think that was the biggest part that I was kind of failing on. I think I think what a lot of guys do, and you tell me if you feel differently. I think a lot of guys will just specifically look at the terrain or the climate, or the length of like the hunts that they're going to be doing and stuff like that. And
they'll look at the boot weight. What's it weigh?
Right. And they start to convince themselves of, I don't know, maybe convince themselves isn't the right word. They start adding on importance onto these things that really don't make a big difference, right? Like, yeah, terrain and climate is important, whether or not, you might want to run an insulated boot or you need something with a little bit more flex or less flex or whatever the case is. But at the end of the day, if the boot fits right, it's going to work, right? The other things you can kind of manage.
Yeah. So the fit has to be spot on first, right? And what I mean is, yes, the size, but more, let's get the shape right.
Right.
Okay. And again, at Latrhop and Sons, our approach is the same approach we use clinically. Basically, you have a standard shape, you have a wide fit shape, you have a super wide shape.
Mm-hmm.
Those different shapes, your foot will match with one of those boot lasts. That's what the shoe's made over. A last is the model.
Mm-hmm.
In the old days, it was wood.
Right.
Wood lasts, when subjected to moisture, would cause it to swell. So that wasn't good. Now they mill those out or run them through a lathe out of plastic or poly something. I don't know what they're made of. I've got them back there.
Right.
So you match that to the foot, then you get the size. Then you look at the stiffness. Then you look at the midsole. You look at the outsole. But the outsole, the midsole, the stability should come last. Like that ought to be the last thing you ought to be looking at, because at the end of the day, do you want your boot to feel comfortable? Do you want to have more flex?
Mm-hmm.
Like, ask yourself that question. You want it to hurt. Like I did a fitting out here for a gentleman early this week, and he came in and he put the boots on his foot and he climbed on it and he goes, I said, here's two options for you. Now at our headquarters here, we've got a really cool ramp out there. It's got a 30-degree angle on it. So guys can literally learn to climb, and you'd be shocked at when people climb it, they'll climb flat-footed. They'll walk up it like that. I'm like, no, dude, you've really got a boot that dig your toe in. So they'll dig the toe in and they'll climb. He said, I feel like I'm getting a little pinch on the back of the boot. Well, he had a knot off the back of his heel. Put this boot on. And then that feels a little different. That's better. I said, which one feels better? He said, honestly, they feel from a technical standpoint about the same. That's a perfect example. We ended up going with this one model, but that was a perfect opportunity for him to compare those two different lasts. And there was one of those boot lasts that matched his foot a little better, and it offloaded some of the pressure because it gave him a little more volume. But you have to do that first. So getting so riveted and focused on, I hear some of these companies talk about a flex rating. Like, how do you know what flex rating you weight? How do you even scale that? Shouldn't there be my body weight, my height, my pack weight for the rating? They're not going to do that. You want to know why they're not going to do that? Because they won't be able to sell this boot. They won't be able to sell that boot.
Right.
Huh?
Yeah.
Think about it. If I told you my boot, my flex rating is for 180-pound guy in a 70 or 80-pound pack, well, what's that boot for then? Now you're not selling those. It's a joke. I'm sorry, it's a joke. Where does a flexible boot come in? I'm putting food plots in. I'm climbing on and off my tractor. I'm trimming out some tree stands. I'm on more relatively flat terrain. I'm not carrying any pack weight. I've got a lot of any foot discomfort under control.
Right. Yeah.
That's kind of where I'm at with somebody who really needs a flexible boot. Well, that's it.
And that's where I've kind of fallen short. And that's like what you opened my eyes to was getting that boot fitted correctly. And it kind of showed me why I've had, struggles with pretty much every other boot that I've had, is because first and foremost, like, it didn't have a version of those boots that were really kind of, fitted for my foot shape. That was the first thing, right? The second part was I was always looking for a boot to fit like my running shoes. You know what I mean? And which is obviously kind of snug, right? It's like a little, it's tighter.
Snug, but also comfort, right?
Right.
That running shoe's comfortable on your foot.
It is, yeah.
And it goes back to how do you make a boot that's going to last you, note this, 3 years or 4 years? How are you making a boot that's actually going to be durable for 4 years? And some of these listeners are probably going, what? Yeah, I got guys out in Arizona, New Mexico that go through some of these boots, 2 to 3 pair a season. And the only reason they're wearing that boot is they're getting some outrageous discount through their guide program. They put our boot on and they get 2-3 seasons out of one pair of boots. So imagine if you get everything shaped right, it can be as comfortable as your running shoe.
Yeah, exactly.
That is honestly, why wouldn't you want that boot to be that comfortable to you?
Right. And so, and I was always looking, and I was sizing my boot, the same way as my running shoes. And that was the first thing you and I talked about was when you put those boots on, how much space do you have? And I'm like, I don't really have any space.
You were running your toes right up in the end.
Yeah. And going back to like our, when I initially reached out to you, was more around keeping warmth, right, for later in the season. And that was the first thing you said, is like, dude, like, you're strangling your feet, and there's no wonder why your feet are getting cold, is because the first thing you're doing is, like, not only is the shape probably wrong, but you're also way too tight. You have no loft, you have no air. So of course your feet are getting cold. And I think that's something guys don't necessarily think about. Like, I never thought about it. I just put more socks on, which then inevitably made the boot even tighter.
It sure does. It does 100%. I mean, we've said this over and over again. So we talk about warm feet, and I'm going to tell you right now, we may not have it all figured out, but what I will tell you is this. I did give you an overview of James and I's background. Can you imagine if you had that background and you were raised in an orthotic laboratory with stacks upon stacks of different materials, and you had a father who was saying, I want this material laminated to that material, I want it beveled this way, and I want that laminated to the top of the shell of the orthotic, and then I need that fit right to that boot. That's the mad scientist, and that's what James and I were in. So our early variation of our cold weather insole that we finally launched this year, I have friends locally here that remember us laminating by hand this material in our laboratory using contact cements and rollers, like paint rollers, but they were made to like a commercial setup to where it would only put dots of it. So it left it to where there would be some breathing taking place, right? We did this by hand. We cut everything out by hand. We didn't have a clicker press. Like, that is where James and I come from. And then everything was ground and fit to the boots perfectly. And then we got so busy with the boots, we had to kind of jump off of that. And then we finally got some guys to get on board with us and do it. And the whole concept, though, is all these years of bow hunting, standing on these steel platforms in seriously cold weather, what worked and what didn't work. It started with a single piece of material. So these concepts that I'm coming up with aren't rocket science, but to develop a serious opinion about something that I take as serious as I do about standing out in the cold in 10-degree weather and getting an extra 30 minutes without feeling the eject button, right? Can make or break putting that late season doe in the freezer. or getting an opportunity at a nice buck you've been wanting all year.
Mm-hmm.
I take that seriously. And when I'm recommending this to my fellow bow hunters and hunters in general, I have to have facts. Like, I have to have facts. So the fact is this: air insulates, right?
Mm-hmm.
No doubt. My commercial windows in this building, they have air trapped in them. They
Yep.
insulate. I get a good buddy who is a customer of mine that helped us on our new building out here with windows. And Chad was telling us in that window how it has like some kind of a resin that's put in there to help break this solid, which was really interesting to me. The conduction of cold from aluminum. So it has this resin, so it breaks the conducting of the cold, right? And so air insulates, and then if air insulates, why in the hell are we smashing air out of your sock, right?
Right.
And then we all know that puffy jackets,
Mm-hmm.
if you pull that thing out and walked outside and put that on and it was packed, you'd freeze, you'd be like, damn. And then as soon as it started catching air, you'd be like, hell yeah.
Yeah,
Feeling pretty good.
exactly.
If it wasn't real windy, right?
Right.
So now what we've done is we've started to understand that. So we got a few things going. The basics is we're trapping the air, we're insulating. So we got a thermal barrier between the bottom of the boot and that, because I've done cutaways of this stuff where the boots, and I could show them if they want to see it. We've taken a boot, rubber boot, and we've cut this, and this is a 1200. Okay. Dude, it's sick. They pack the insulation at the heel. Like the back of the heel of the boot and the cutaway is full. When was the last time the back of your heel got cold?
Yeah, never.
Right?
Yeah.
The top of the arch is packed, and the top of the rubber, that's kind of compressed. But then under that foot, there's a hunk of rubber.
Yeah. Where you're losing all your heat.
Gone. Bye-bye. And what they're putting in there is nothing, and it's because it's cheap. And they're all doing this. It's not one specific brand. If they did that, their $250 rubber boots would end up costing you $300+ to do it.
Right.
You know as well as I do what would happen.
Yeah.
So what we're doing is we're enhancing this. We're building on that. We're modifying it. And this whole setup will trap air. Now, I'm telling you right now, I see all these ads on social media for socks. And have you been noticing all this crap popping up?
Yeah.
I have people saying to me, have you tried these? Have you tried these? Have you tried these? The only thing that I can say is most of these people are wearing subpar socks that are probably smashed and wore out.
Right.
We might as well give the listeners, viewers, a bit of a deal on socks. Anytime you get this pilling where you get these little beads on your backs of your socks or the bottom, that's the fibers actually breaking down and rolling up into little balls. You're losing the sock. It's basically starting to disintegrate. Okay.
Right.
If that's taking place, how much loft and air trapment do you think is taking place under the heel and the ball of the foot? Probably not much, right?
Right.
And you've compressed it. So I'm going to stick my neck out and say this. There are some really good socks. There's some average socks. But most importantly, I say you need to have your boot size for cold weather hunting to where you got ample wiggle room. You can put a high loft sock in there that's like a puffy jacket around your feet, and you drop one of these cold weather insoles in there, and because it's got like that micro egg crate top to it,
Mm-hmm.
when you sit in your stand, your foot's not full weight bearing on it.
Mm-hmm.
You've got these dimples supporting you, the loft of the sock drops into those. Now you've got even more. So you've got that thermal barrier, you're trapping that air, and we have this plate that we designed that's got exceptional heel height in it. Like it lifts a little because these rubber boots are notorious for having low heels, but it cups the back of the heel. And we actually went through a series of molds to get them right. And it's a deeper heel seat, so it really wraps around the back of the heel because we knew guys would have a heavier sock on. Got a little more arch support in it. It's a nice flange, and I mean, it really does wonders in that boot.
Yeah.
And I'm telling you right now, that was something over 2 years was being tested for us. We have guys up in Minnesota that do a lot of ice fishing, waterfowl hunting, whitetail hunting, using these before we ever launched it this year. So we really got our ducks in a row on this one.
Yeah, man. I mean, the thing that really kind of, Josh did a video on it and putting them in a rubber boot and then actually tested it.
I know.
And I saw like the difference in like, with the regular insole in it, it was one temperature. With the non-typical insole in it, it was like 6-7 degrees higher. Right. And I'm like, man, if you could get 6 or 7 degrees of additional heat in your foot in late season, whenever the ambient temperatures, just say it's 30 out or 25 out or whatever, it's like, can you stand that, actually, as you said, that extra half hour that you may not otherwise want to sit, or whatever the case is?
Yeah, and I'm telling you, there has been a need for this, and it's a very, very affordable upgrade.
Well, that was my biggest thing. That's why I originally kind of reached out to you guys, because I was like,
affordable.
I mean, I should have just went to the website and looked for myself, but I had messaged you guys because I was like, does this really work? That was my first question, because I saw Josh's thing, right? Because it was something I'd never seen before.
Well, it was something I hadn't seen, and I never expected that. I actually got called into a meeting and said, hey, you need to look at this. I said, what is it? This guy's sticking thermometers in his boots with our insoles. And I'm like, what is this? I had no idea he was doing it.
Yeah. Yeah.
I was kind of like biting my nails thinking,
it worked out though, man. And then the other part was I was like, well, dude, these have to be expensive if they're doing that. And they're not. They're affordable, like extremely affordable, And so even if someone doesn't have a pair of your boots, they can get the benefit of these by using these insoles and putting them in whatever boots they're using now.
Absolutely, you can. And here's the thing. We not only are focusing on that, there are hunters that are getting them for their wife's shoes.
Oh, wow. Yeah. I should do that for my wife, actually.
They're traveling, right? Like, the snow's coming. They want to have warm feet. They have office jobs. What's wrong with sitting in an office where your feet get cold? Or how about the person that's not hunting, that's exercising, even in this weather?
Yeah.
We all know some people that are hardcore like that don't go to a gym. And the ice fishermen, the waterfowl hunters. I mean, well, let's take this. I don't know how many of your viewers are out west mountain hunters. You're not going to wear a rubber boot. I mean, that was one thing Josh said, we'll use the rubber boots for certain applications, but there's other applications where I got to hike into some of these places. Rubber boots aren't good.
Yeah.
You mentioned that to me about some of the country that you guys got to hike into. You're not going to do that. That's where a 2 insole system set up. So we'll say you've got your performance mountain boot. Okay. Mm-hmm. We'll say you're not in the market to have Stephen or James sit and talk with you and get your boot fit, right?
Right.
But Stephen, what can you do for me? You just pick up the phone. We establish what size it is and the brand. We've got patterns for all that. Now what you do is you outfit it with the Synergy insole. That's that polymer gel material. It's different than the non-typical. Now that's your active. Take that into your stand, drop it into a bag, drop your non-typicals, get up in your stand, loosen the laces on your boot so you're not compressing the air. Now you have a thermal barrier there.
Yep.
It's a 2 footbed system. So now you've turned your mountain boots into an enduro, basically. You kind of getting the best of it. Now you're clearly going to hit some of this weather like I'm getting ready to luckily get to where I can use that rubber boot with that non-typical. I'm just absolutely stoked about the product because we're meeting so many great guys in this community that, as much as the whitetail community is part of my scene, I've been so focused on mountain hunting and sheep and goat and developing products for that. God, I'm in heaven. I
Yeah.
mean, sitting and talking with guys like yourself and Josh and Dan. I mean, it's pretty awesome, man.
Yeah. I mean, and the thing is too, is that, at least for me, it's like, I look at it, cause I've got a set of mountain boots that you help me size.
Yeah.
And I've got to spend a little bit of time walking around in them and stuff. Like, I haven't been able to hunt in them yet just because of, holidays, and then got sick and whatnot. So hopefully I'm able to get out in the next couple of weeks. But my boots have to, for me, being a regular dude, like, have to work for across the spectrum, right? It's like, cause I hunt a lot of mountain ground, I hunt a lot of swamps, and these boots will work for all of that. But also I go out west and hunt, I hunt, the mountains in Idaho or Montana or whatever the case is. And so for me, it's, or guys like me, it's like, you can get that one boot that I can do, they're my workhorse, right? They're going to go with me in the whitetail hunts, and they're going to go with me on the Western hunts. You know what I mean? And that's the nice thing about what you guys are able to do. It's like, once you get that boot that fits correctly, with the right shape, and you go through a fitting and make sure that it's sized correctly and all that stuff,
It helps.
it works, across the spectrum, and so.
What do you think, like, now with your kind of your setup that you have, where are you seeing like the application, the temperature now with the setup that you've got, like with your boot, so that everyone knows you've got, did we go with the warm or did we go with the uninsulated?
Uninsulated.
Okay,
I usually always wore
uninsulated mountain hunter. That's the all leather boot. We did do with the wide fit, didn't we?
Yep.
You've got you and I talked about that. You had a wider 4-foot. We did change the size too, didn't we?
Yep, we went, because I was always historically wearing a 10.5, and they fit really tight. So we're now wearing an 11.
Okay, so we went up a half size, which is only 1/8 of an inch. It's not a half inch. And then we got the Synergy insoles.
Yep.
Right. So those are going to be like your power hitter insoles, like you're really huffing and puffing. You're carrying weight. We're trying to reduce shear force. So shear force is what heats up the skin and makes it feel raw or sore. The material also absorbs impact. So it's absorbing the impact, but it's reducing the rebound. And then we have the cold weather non-typical.
Yep.
So we're running a 2 different footbeds. So when do you think that, like, how would you run that setup for yourself? What are you thinking?
So I mean,
everyone's a little different, man.
Yeah. So for me, the way the boot's set up, just standard as it is, that'll probably get me through till probably mid to late November, I would say, like with that setup here on the East Coast. Now, I'm a guy who I tolerate the cold pretty well, like for the most part.
Right.
And so, I'm usually pretty good until I get into that like late December kind of time frame. And then I think once I hit like Thanksgiving, that's when the non-typical insole will likely travel with me. Or if I know I'm going to get, because the mountain that I hunt, yes, it is Eastern PA, but it's also in the mountains to where it does get colder. So there were definitely mornings in November that I was having, temperatures that were in the teens when I was walking in, and if it's going to be a day that I'm going to sit all day and I'm not going to get up and move, well, that would be a day that the non-typical would go with me, because I'm going to sit all day. I don't want to be having to get up and move my feet around to try to get some warmth moving or whatever the case is. I want to just be able to sit and be still. So that's whenever I'd probably take the non-typical with me. So it'll probably travel with me starting in November on those cold November days if I'm going to sit all day. And I would say all through October, for the most part, I'll be able to just utilize the boot as it is.
Yeah, and we've had a lot of questions, so we probably ought to say this so that people understand this. Why wouldn't you wear the non-typical a mile and a half, 2 miles in, and I would say this so that everyone understands this. The technology that has been blended with this foam, which is the red thermal barrier between your foot and the bottom, just the base material by itself has aerogel spheres or dust mixed in with it, okay? Those are just on a micro scale. You'll have to research it yourself. I'm not a chemist, but the cell structure is so fine that under load, you can't compress them, so they still insulate. But I still believe professionally that if you subject that insole to daily wear like that, I think you're going to break down some of that structure of that foam. We're going to need to get through this year and see, but I got guys, I'm cringing. They're saying, dude, I'm wearing these things nonstop and they look fine. Like when I pull them out, they look fine. Well, okay, but I have to say this. It wasn't designed to wear it like Synergy insoles. So we want to make sure people understand, well, why would you do that? Why don't you just wear it? Well, if you want to get the longevity out of your $35 insole.
Well, that's what I was just going to say. Like for me personally, when it gets cold, I'll probably just throw them in and wear them. Because the truth of the matter is, it's like I'd rather have warm feet and not even be a thought in my mind, and just go, I'm gonna pick up a pair for next year. You know what I mean? It's like
a lot of guys are doing that because it's like for $35, they can throw a pair into their rubber boots, their waders. They don't have to screw with calling me and saying, "Hey, Steven, now should I cut it to this one or should I cut?" You know what I mean?
Right? Yeah.
Like $35, and you just drop them in and you just run the damn things, and it's out of sight, out of mind, and focus on, getting your socks right and the rest of this, and go hunt.
Yeah, exactly. So that's probably how I will end up doing it, and they'll probably go in. If I do it that way, I would say they'll probably go in at the beginning of November. Like I'll probably just throw them in.
Yeah, and part of the reason that I bring that up is because everyone's body chemistry is different, right? Like you said, I don't get real cold, but there's some people that suffer from really sweaty feet, and even a sock and even a non-typical footbed and even a boot that's sized correctly, if they don't use some kind of an antiperspirant on their bare feet for a week up to that, they're still messed up. And that's a key. That helps. That
was one thing you kind of turned me on to too, was that, because it's weird. My feet sometimes sweat and sometimes don't, but I'm cognizant of that when I'm hunting. It's like, I'm trying to just overall try not to sweat when it's cold, just in general, but particularly my feet. And so that's another thing you turned me on to, was just, using some antiperspirant on my feet and kind of.
There's some stuff out there that'll really help, and it slows that buildup down, and we all know what it's like to have that. Everyone can relate. You find success in the whitetail field dressing, and I don't know how many times I've had to grab handfuls of snow and wipe my feet down to just get my hands clean, and then that evaporation takes place and you just freeze. And then when, from a foot perspective, it's trying to evaporate, so you're getting cold, but then you're just soaking the sock, right? And then the lining of the boot, and so on and so forth. So
yeah, man, I've learned a ton from you about boots. And it's funny because I have a little bit more space in these boots, and they feel so much better. And the other thing we talked about too was heel slip, and what you basically educated me on was that, I spent a lot of time trying to get rid of all heel slip, and you were like, getting rid of all heel slip is not a thing. Like there's always going to probably be a little bit of it. It's getting the boot fit correctly and sized correctly to where it's not an issue, And the funny thing is that the way these boots actually lace and the way they latch on that first hook, I get the least amount of. I was always thinking the smaller my boot was, the less slip I would have. But what I've seen or found now is that actually the size of my boot and the shape of my boot now, I have less heel slip than I ever had in the boots that I've worn previously that were smaller and tighter fitting.
Yeah,
which is wild.
Yeah, what's cool about that is this goes back to our clinical setting where we're putting casts on people's feet, right? Like we did that in Dad's clinic. But you can't put a fiberglass cast on someone if you don't pad their ankle on the back of the Achilles tendon and stuff. And different clinics do things differently. So what James and I have done is we've taken the concept of reinforcing a boot to stabilize and protect the boot, but you can't have a boot that's that comfortable if you don't apply that kind of philosophy of fitting the cast to the inside of these boots. So there's some pretty serious padding around the ankle area and the back of the Achilles tendon. And what you're referring to in that lacing is you got a couple things in that Mountain Hunter boot particularly. The upper has almost an accordion notch going up it. Then you have ball bearing hardware that is attached to each one of those independently. So there's a simple little hook at the top that has two recessed areas. And because they're recessed, when you slide that lace under tension into it, it locks the lower tension. So now you've isolated that fit. Now you can adjust your lace tension differently at the top. And when you do that, you're actually compressing that foam. The air's getting pushed out of the foam around the ankle. And we will call it seating the foot back into the boot. But then once you tie it off, there's some recovery that takes place. So it's almost as if it's like a Tempur-Pedic mattress. It's filling voids. Now, in years of developing this stuff, and believe it or not, our designer over in Italy, we kind of, I think, make him scratch his head like, why are they wanting to do that? Because it works. When we were dealing with wound care, the way to offload peak pressures on a person's foot to ensure they don't get a blister or a sore, you have total contact. Okay? If I fill the void as close as possible, how can there be, right? And I know that's a bit of an exaggeration, but why not take it as far as you can possibly take it? And that's what James and I have tried to do. So you do a couple things. You offload the back of the heel. That is probably one of the most common locations of people not doing well in a Kenetrek or some of these other boots. It's because the boot is stiff. They have done nothing internally in that boot to really make it an anatomical fit. Anatomical fit means we're capturing the Achilles tendon, we're capturing the ankle bone, we're filling these voids. All of that helps ensure that you're like sliding into a downhill ski boot, booty or something, you know?
Right.
That's what we've tried to do, and that's what you're experiencing.
Yeah, man. It's they've been a blessing to my feet. That's for sure.
They're helping you.
Yeah. Awesome, man. Well, I know I've kept you here just about an hour and a half. Before I let you get going, though, I think we wanted to give the folks that are listening, and I'll mention this whenever I do, the upfront of this stuff too, but I think we wanted to give the folks out there a code where they can use at the Latrhop & Sons website, right?
Yes, we want to make sure that anybody that's listening, that we've still got some late season. I want to say that it's Truth 10, so we want to make sure that we get those out to those guys that'll set them up and get them into a set of the non-typical footbeds. That's the least we can do to try to help some guys out.
Awesome. Yeah. So use the code Truth10, get yourself a set of the non-typical insoles. That way you have a little additional warmth here during late season. And then before I let you get out of here, let folks know where they can find out more information, the website, your socials, and all that kind of stuff.
Absolutely.
Awesome, man. Well, I appreciate you coming on, dude. I hope you have a great hunt in the snow and enjoy it, since I know you've been looking forward to it.
Yeah.
And then I'm sure we'll be in touch after. I'll look for that grip and grin this weekend.
Thanks a lot, Clint.
All right, folks, that is a wrap for today's show. I'd like to thank all of you for listening. And if you haven't yet, please head over to iTunes and leave us a 5-star rating, and be sure to subscribe to the podcast. And hell, while you're at it, head over to YouTube and give us a sub there too. And before I shut this thing down, we need to give a big shout out to our partners who continue to help us make this podcast possible. Osseo Gear, Tethered, Exodus Outdoor Gear, and Genesee Beer. And until next time, we'll see y'all.